The lights of Kepler Station flickered like distant stars against the black void of space. Hundreds of ships came and went every day, carrying goods and people between worlds that most humans had never heard of. The station was huge, bigger than any city on old Earth, with spinning sections that created artificial gravity for the many different species that lived and worked there. Captain Zareth stood at the observation deck of her ship, watching the busy traffic outside. Her blue skin had the slight shimmer that all Vaxians possessed, and her forearms moved gracefully as she reviewed the day's shipping reports. She had been a trader for 20 years, moving cargo between the outer colonies and the core worlds. But lately something felt different about the galaxy. "Captain," called her first officer Kellen from across the bridge. "The news feeds are talking about another attack in the Epsilon sector. The Kethrans hit 3 more colonies yesterday." Zareth's face darkened. The Kethran Empire had been growing more aggressive over the past few months, attacking civilian settlements and claiming new territory with brutal efficiency. Their gray insect-like warriors showed no mercy to anyone who stood in their way. What worried her most was how organized they had become. "Any word from the Confederation fleet?" she asked. "Admiral Vextar's forces are spread too thin. They can barely protect the core worlds, let alone the outer colonies," Kellen replied, his voice heavy with concern. Zareth nodded slowly. She had heard similar reports from dozens of systems. The Vaxian Confederacy, once the strongest power in this part of the galaxy, was losing ground every day. Their ships were good, but the Ketherans had numbers and a willingness to destroy anything in their path. "You know what this reminds me of?" said her engineer, old Drakmore, looking up from his console. The elderly Vaxian had worked on ships, longer than anyone else on the crew. "The old stories my grandfather used to tell, about the time before the Great Plague, when there were other species fighting wars like this." "What stories?" asked Kellen. Drakmore leaned back in his chair, his weathered hands folding together. "Stories about the Terrans, the humans. They say that 300 years ago, there was a species called humans who came from a world called Earth. They were supposed to be unpredictable, dangerous in ways that no one could understand." Zareth had heard these stories before, usually in bars on distant stations when old spacers had too much to drink. "Those are just legends, Drakmore. Fairy tales to scare children." "Maybe," the old engineer said with a shrug. "But the stories say they disappeared all at once. One day they were there, the next day they were gone. No trace, no explanation. Some say they died from a plague, others think they just left for parts unknown." "If they were real, where are they now?" Kellen asked. "That's the question, isn't it?" Drakmore replied. Far away from Kepler Station, in a region of space that most star charts marked as empty, Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat in the communications center of a ship that didn't officially exist. The EDS Horizon was sleek and dark, built with technology that could bend light around its hull and slip through space without being detected by any known sensors. Jake was young for his rank, only 25, but he had been selected for this mission because of his ability to understand alien languages and decode their communications. For the past 6 months, he had been listening to the chatter between different species, learning about their politics, their fears, and their wars. "Anything interesting today?" asked Commander Lisa Hayes as she entered the communications room. She was in her 40s, with the calm confidence that came from years of command experience. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform bore no insignia that would identify her nationality or rank to outsiders. "The Kethrans are moving faster than we thought," Jake replied, pointing to the displays showing intercepted messages. "They hit 3 more civilian colonies yesterday. The Vaxians are calling for emergency council meetings, but they don't have the ships to stop them." Lisa studied the information with professional interest. "What about casualties?" "Hi. The Kethrans aren't taking prisoners, men, women, children. They're killing everyone who can't escape in time." Jake's voice was tight with controlled anger. "And the other species? Are they doing anything to help?" "The Zilani are sending medical supplies, but they don't have a military. The Traders Guild is staying neutral, as usual. Everyone else is too far away or too scared to get involved." Lisa nodded grimly. This was exactly what Earth Command had feared would happen. After 3 centuries of watching from the shadows, humanity had hoped that the other species would learn to solve their problems without violence. Instead, they seemed to be repeating the same cycles of war and conquest that had plagued the galaxy for thousands of years. "Any mention of humans in their communications?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "A few references to old legends, but nothing serious. Most of them think we're extinct, if they think we existed at all." This was both good and bad news. The secrecy that had protected humanity for 300 years was still intact, but it also meant that no one expected help from Earth. The galaxy's civilizations would have to face the Kethran threat alone, unless humanity decided to break its long isolation. "Send a full report to Admiral Carter," Lisa ordered. "Include everything we know about Kethran military capabilities and movement patterns. Command needs to understand how bad this is getting." As Jake began preparing the encrypted transmission, Lisa walked to the observation window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, millions of innocent people were dying in a war that their leaders couldn't stop. The technology to end this conflict quickly existed, but using it would reveal humanity's presence to a galaxy that had forgotten they ever existed. She thought about her daughter back on Earth, growing up in cities that most aliens would consider impossible. Humanity had spent 3 centuries not just recovering from the plague that had nearly destroyed them, but advancing in ways that other species couldn't imagine. They had solved problems of energy, consciousness, and reality itself. But with great power came difficult choices. Earth's leaders had sworn never to repeat the mistakes that had led to their near extinction. They would not conquer, would not impose their will on others, would not become the very thing they had once fought against. Yet watching genocide happen while having the power to stop it was its own kind of moral failure. The decision would soon be made by people far above her rank, but Lisa Hayes knew that humanity's long isolation was coming to an end. The question wasn't whether they would reveal themselves, but when and how they would choose to emerge from the shadows. In the depths of space, ancient legends were about to become very real. War Commander Thektar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as another star system fell to his forces. The Kethran Empire had been expanding for months now, and nothing seemed able to stop them. His gray chitinous armor gleamed under the ship's lights as he studied the tactical displays showing his fleet's positions. "Commander, the orbital defenses around New Carthage have been destroyed," reported his tactical officer. "Ground forces are ready to begin the final assault." Thektar's mandibles clicked together in satisfaction. New Carthage was home to over 2 million civilians from a dozen different species. Once it fell, the entire sector would be under Kethran control. The other species would learn that resistance was pointless. "Begin the bombardment," he ordered. "Leave no structure standing." On the surface of New Carthage, Amy Patterson ran through the underground tunnels that connected the emergency shelters. She was a human administrative coordinator, though none of the aliens she worked with knew her true species. As far as they were concerned, she was just another refugee who had arrived on the colony world a few years ago. The tunnels shook as Kethran energy weapons struck the surface above. Dust fell from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance children were crying. Amy had helped organize the evacuation of over 50,000 civilians into these shelters, but she knew they wouldn't hold forever. "Amy," called Dr. Veltar, a Vaxian medic who had been treating the wounded. "The North Shelter is taking heavy damage. We need to move the families there to the deeper levels." Amy nodded and grabbed her communication device. She had been coordinating refugee movements for 3 days now, ever since the Kethran fleet had arrived in the system. The local defense forces had fought bravely, but they were vastly outnumbered. Most of their ships had been destroyed in the first few hours of fighting. "All section leaders, this is Amy," she broadcast on the emergency channel. "Begin moving everyone from sectors 7 through 12 to the lower levels. Use the main evacuation routes and stay calm." As she spoke, she thought about the hidden transmitter in her quarters that could call for help from Earth, but using it would break 3 centuries of secrecy and expose humanity's presence to the galaxy. The decision wasn't hers to make. Above the planet, the last of the Vaxian defense ships tried desperately to protect the evacuation transports. Captain Zarath, who had arrived with a small convoy of rescue ships, watched in horror as Kethran fighters tore through the civilian vessels trying to escape. "We can't hold them much longer," her weapons officer reported. "Their numbers are too great." Zarath's ship shuddered as enemy fire struck their shields. Around her, the bridge crew worked frantically to keep their weapons and engines running, but she could see the hopelessness in their eyes. In a few more minutes, the Kethran forces would break through their line and complete the massacre below. "All ships, this is Captain Zarath," she broadcast to her small fleet. "We've done all we can. Begin emergency jump preparations. We'll have to abandon the planet." The words tasted bitter in her mouth, but there was no other choice. Staying would only add their ships to the list of casualties. Then something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to ripple and bend, like water disturbed by a stone. 3 massive shapes emerged from what looked like folded reality itself, their hulls shimmering with energy that hurt to look at directly. The ships were unlike anything anyone had ever seen, with curves that seemed organic and surfaces that shifted between solid matter and pure light. The largest of the 3 vessels was easily twice the size of Tektar's flagship, but it moved, with the grace of something alive. Strange geometric patterns flowed across its hull, and weapon ports opened like flowers blooming in fast motion. "Unknown vessels, identify yourselves," Tektar demanded over the communication channels. "You are interfering with Kethran military operations." The response came in a calm, clear voice that spoke perfect galactic standard. "This is Captain Ryan Clark of the Earth Defense Ship Liberty. You are ordered to cease your attack on civilian targets immediately." Tektar's mandibles clicked in confusion. Earth? That was the mythical homeworld of the legendary humans, a species that most considered to be extinct or fictional. Someone was playing games with him. "I don't know what species you represent," Tektar replied, "but you will withdraw immediately or be destroyed." "We represent the people you call Terrans." Captain Clark's voice remained steady. "The people you thought were legends. We're giving you one chance to leave peacefully." On the surface of New Carthage, Amy Patterson felt her hidden communicator buzz with an encrypted signal. Her hands shook as she read the message. "Blackbird protocol activated. Human vessels engaging. Maintain cover." The children around her had stopped crying, looking up at the ceiling as the sound of weapons fire changed. The deep rumble of Kethran energy cannons was being answered by something else, something that made the air itself hum with power. In space above, the 3 human ships began to demonstrate capabilities that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. The EDS Liberty fired weapons that seemed to bend space around enemy vessels, creating gravity wells that crushed Kethran ships like tin cans. The EDS Constitution deployed energy fields that caused enemy weapons to simply pass through its hull, without effect. The EDS Independence seemed to exist in multiple locations at once, appearing and disappearing as it systematically disabled the Kethran fleet. War Commander Tektar watched in growing terror as his massive fleet, which had seemed unstoppable minutes before, was torn apart by just 3 enemy vessels. His tactical officers shouted reports of impossible weapon effects and defensive systems that operated outside known physics. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. "What kind of technology are they using?" Before anyone could answer, the EDS Liberty appeared directly in front of his flagship, so close that he could see the strange symbols flowing across its hull. The ship's weapons locked onto his bridge, and he knew that death was only seconds away. "Commander Tektar," came Captain Clark's voice, now speaking directly to him. "Your fleet is defeated. Surrender now and your crews will be spared." "Impossible," Tektar whispered. "We are the Kethran Empire. We do not surrender." "You do. Now," Clark replied simply. A beam of energy struck Tektar's ship, but instead of destroying it, the weapon seemed to pass through every system on board. Lights flickered and died. Engines went silent. Weapons powered down. In seconds, the mighty Kethran flagship had become a powerless hulk drifting in space. Around them, the same thing was happening to every ship in the Kethran fleet. Hundreds of vessels that had terrorized the galaxy for months were now floating. helplessly, their crews alive but their ships completely disabled. Captain Zarath stared at her displays in amazement. The entire battle had lasted less than 10 minutes and not a single Kethran ship had been destroyed. Whoever these humans were, they had shown mercy even to an enemy that had shown none to others. "All civilian vessels, this is Captain Clark," came the voice over the communication channels. "The threat has been neutralized. Begin rescue operations for any survivors." On New Carthage, Amy Patterson looked around at the faces of the people she had helped save. Aliens from a dozen different species, all looking up at the ceiling with hope instead of fear, for the first time in days. Her communicator buzzed again with another message. "Phase 1 complete. Maintain operational security." "This is just the beginning." Amy smiled as she helped a young Vaxian child to his feet. The galaxy was about to learn that some legends were more real than anyone had imagined. Above them, 3 impossible ships hung in space like harbingers of a new age, while the wreckage of what had once been the sector's most feared fleet drifted silently in the void. News of what happened at New Carthage spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Every communication network, every news service, every trader and diplomat carried the same impossible story. 3 unknown ships had appeared from nowhere and destroyed an entire Kethran fleet in minutes without firing a single shot that killed anyone. Captain Zarath sat in her quarters aboard her damaged ship, watching the recorded footage over and over again. The way those 3 vessels had moved, the weapons they had used, the complete control they had shown over the battlefield, it all matched descriptions from the oldest stories her people told about the legendary Terrans. "Computer, access historical archives," she said aloud. "Search for all records containing references to human military tactics." The screen filled with ancient texts, most of them considered myths or fairy tales. But as Zarath read through them, patterns began to emerge. The stories spoke of humans who could bend space itself, who built ships that were more alive than mechanical, who fought wars with technology that seemed like magic to other species. "Impossible," she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't impossible at all. The humans hadn't died out 3 centuries ago. They had simply hidden themselves so well that the entire galaxy had forgotten they were real. On Earth, in a meeting room buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, President Helen Foster stood before the Global Defense Council. The room was simple and functional, with no decorations except for a single flag showing the blue and green world that humanity called home. "The secret is out," she said to the assembled leaders. "We can't pretend to be extinct anymore." General Mike Davis, head of Earth Defense Command, leaned forward in his chair. "The Kethrans are already mobilizing their home fleets. Our intelligence shows they're calling up every ship they have." "How many?" asked Secretary of State Carol Manning. "Over 10,000 vessels, the largest military force assembled in galactic history." President Foster nodded slowly. She had known this day would come eventually. Humanity had spent 300 years preparing for it, advancing their technology and their understanding of the universe while the rest of the galaxy remained locked in endless cycles of war and conquest. "What about our forces?" she asked. 12 ships, replied General Davis. "That's all we need." The other council members looked surprised, but President Foster just smiled. She had seen what human technology could do. The ships they had built were more than machines. They were extensions of human consciousness itself, powered by the collective will and intelligence of their crews. "Very well," she said. "Give the order. Operation Daybreak is authorized." Far away in the depths of Kethran space, Supreme War Leader Krathzon stood before the largest gathering of military commanders in his species' history. The great war room of the Imperial Palace was filled with hundreds of officers, each representing thousands of ships and millions of warriors. "We have been humiliated," Krathzon declared, his voice echoing off the metal walls. 3 ships, just 3, have made fools of our greatest fleet. This insult cannot stand." The assembled commanders clicked their mandibles in agreement. The Kethran Empire had built its reputation on being unstoppable in battle. If word spread that they could be defeated so easily, their entire civilization would collapse. Intelligence reports suggest these ships belong to the mythical humans, continued the Supreme War Leader. Whether they are real or not does not matter. What matters is that they must be destroyed. One of the younger commanders raised a claw. Supreme Leader, our analysts have studied the battle footage. The weapons these ships used appear to violate known physics. How do we fight an enemy that can bend reality itself? Krathzon's eyes glowed with cold fury. We fight them with numbers. We fight them with courage. We fight them with the knowledge that the Kethron Empire has never been defeated by any force in the galaxy. The war room filled with the sound of claws striking armor as the commander saluted. Within hours, every Kethron ship in the Empire would be moving toward the neutral zone, where long-range sensors had detected the human vessels waiting. Commander, Pete Johnson stood on the bridge of the EDS Yorktown, watching as 11 other Earthships took their positions around his flagship. Each vessel was unique, grown rather than built, shaped by the consciousness of its crew and powered by technology that merged human thought with the fundamental forces of the universe. Navigator Williams, report, he said calmly. Katie Williams, whose mind was directly connected to the ship's quantum navigation systems, opened her eyes and smiled. Kethran fleet detected at the edge of sensor range, Commander. 11,437 vessels arranged in standard battle formation. Chief Engineer Dan Baker, whose consciousness had merged with the ship's reality manipulation drives, looked up from his console. All systems are ready, sir. The fleet is prepared for Phase 2 operations. Pete nodded. Phase 2 was the designation for open combat using humanity's full technological capabilities. It was something they had hoped never to use. But the Kethrons had forced their hand by refusing to accept defeat. Open a channel to the Kethron fleet, he ordered. The main screen filled with the image of Supreme War Leader Krathzon, his chitinous features twisted with rage. Behind him, Pete could see hundreds of other Kethron officers all glaring at the camera with identical expressions of hatred. I am Commander Pete Johnson of the Earth Defense Fleet, Pete said in a calm, professional voice. You are ordered to withdraw your forces immediately. Krathzon's mandibles clicked rapidly. I am Supreme War Leader Krathzon of the Kethron Empire. We do not take orders from mythical species. Your 3 ships may have surprised War Commander Thektar, but you now face the full might of the Empire. Surrender, and we will make your deaths quick. Pete shook his head sadly. We are not 3 ships, Supreme War Leader. We are 12, and we are not mythical. 12 ships against 11,000? Krathzon laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You are either insane or suicidal. We are human, Pete replied simply. The battle began without warning as the Kethron fleet opened fire with everything they had. Thousands of energy beams and missile volleys crossed the space between the 2 forces, enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. None of it touched the human ships. The 12 Earth vessels seemed to exist in a different reality than their enemies. Weapons passed through them like they were ghosts, while their own attacks bent space itself around the Kethron fleet. The EDS Yorktown created gravity wells that pulled enemy ships out of formation. The EDS Enterprise generated time distortions that slowed entire squadrons to a crawl. The EDS Intrepid phased sections of enemy vessels out of normal space, leaving them unable to function. Supreme War Leader Krathzon watched in growing horror as his massive fleet was systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to obey different laws of physics. Ships that had taken decades to build were disabled in seconds by weapons that his science officers couldn't even identify. How? He whispered. How is this possible? His tactical officer, his voice shaking with fear, provided the answer that changed everything. Supreme Leader, these aren't just ships. Our sensors show that each vessel has hundreds of organic life forms integrated directly into its systems. They're not fighting us with machines. They're fighting us with living technology that thinks and adapts. As if to prove his point, the EDS Yorktown suddenly appeared directly in front of the Kethran flagship, its hull shifting and flowing like liquid metal. Weapon ports opened along its surface, each one aimed at a critical system on the enemy vessel. This is your final warning, came Commander Johnson's voice. Surrender now, or we will be forced to disable your entire fleet." Krathzon looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. In their eyes he saw something he had never seen before in a Kethran warrior. Fear. Not fear of death, but fear of something beyond their understanding, something that made them feel small and primitive. He began, then stopped. The word stuck in his throat like broken glass. "We surrender," he finally whispered. The human ships immediately stopped their attack, hanging motionless in space like 12 perfect jewels against the stars. Around them, the greatest military force in galactic history drifted helplessly, their weapons silent and their engines dead. Commander Pete Johnson's voice echoed across every ship in both fleets. "All Kethran vessels, you will proceed to designated coordinates for processing. Any attempt to restart your weapon systems will result in permanent disabling of your ships." As the massive enemy fleet began to move under human direction, Pete turned to his crew. "Signal Earth Command. Tell them that Phase 2 is complete." Katie Williams smiled as she sent the message that would change the galaxy forever. Message. Sent, Commander. Earth Command acknowledges. They're asking if we're ready for Phase 3. "What's Phase 3? Asked Chief Engineer Baker. Pete looked out at the stars, where somewhere beyond the edge of known space an entire civilization was about to learn that legends could become reality. "Phase 3, he said quietly, is when we introduce ourselves to the rest of the galaxy." The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The entire Kethran Empire, the most powerful military force known to civilization, had surrendered to just 12 ships. Every species, every government, every trader and diplomat was asking the same question. Who were these humans, and how had they become so powerful? Supreme War Leader Krathzon sat in his disabled flagship, staring at the strange vessel that hung motionless beside his ship. The human vessel called EDS Yorktown was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, its hull flowing and shifting like living metal. He had spent his entire life believing that the Kethran Empire was the strongest force in the universe. Now he knew how wrong he had been. "Supreme Leader," his communications officer said quietly, "the humans are requesting permission to come aboard." Krathzon nodded slowly. "Let them come. I want to see these legendary beings with my own eyes." When the airlock opened, Krathzon expected to see warriors in battle armor, conquerors come to claim their victory. Instead, he saw 3 humans in simple uniforms, walking calmly and showing no signs of fear or aggression. The leader was a woman with short brown hair and kind eyes that seemed much older than her face. "I am Dr. Carol Martinez," she said in perfect Kethran language. "I'm a xenobiologist from Earth. We've come to talk." "You speak our language," Krathzon observed, surprised. "We've been listening to your communications for a long time," Dr. Martinez replied. "We've learned many languages while we've been away." "Away?" Krathzon's mandibles clicked in confusion. "The stories say your species died from a plague 3 centuries ago." Dr. Martinez smiled sadly. "We almost did. The plague killed billions of our people, but we didn't die out. We chose to leave." She gestured to one of her companions, a man with gray hair and gentle hands. "This is Dr. Steve Wilson, our historian. He can tell you what really happened." Dr. Wilson stepped forward and activated a small device that projected images into the air. The hologram showed a blue and green world covered with cities and forests. Then scenes of hospitals filled with sick and dying people. 300 years ago, humanity was part of the galactic community, Dr. Wilson explained. "We traded with other species, shared knowledge, explored space together. Then the plague came. It was engineered specifically to target human biology. The images changed to show empty cities and abandoned colonies. We never found out who created the plague or why, but we realized that someone wanted humanity extinct. So we made a choice." "What choice?" Krathzon asked. "We chose to disappear," Dr. Martinez answered. "We gathered every human we could find and retreated to hidden colonies beyond the edge of known space. We let the galaxy think we had died out." Krathzon stared at the humans in front of him. "But why? Why hide for so long?" "Because we needed time," said the third human, a young woman named Dr. Lisa Chen. Time to cure the plague. Time to understand what had happened to us, and time to make sure it never happened again. Dr. Wilson activated more images showing the development of human technology over the centuries. We didn't just survive during our exile, we evolved. We learned to merge our consciousness with our technology. We discovered how to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. Your ships, Krathzon said quietly. They're not just machines, are they? No, Dr. Martinez replied. They're extensions of ourselves. Each ship has hundreds of human minds connected to its systems, thinking and adapting in real time. What you call impossible technology is just humans and machines working together as one. Meanwhile, on Kepler Station, Captain Zarath was preparing for the most important journey of her life. She had convinced the Vaxian Confederacy to let her lead a diplomatic mission to make contact with the humans. Her ship, the VCS Harmony, was loaded with historical records and ancient artifacts that proved humans had once existed. Captain, her first officer Kellen said, as they approached the coordinates where the human fleet waited, sensors are detecting 12 vessels in formation. They're not trying to hide anymore. Zarath looked at the display and gasped. The human ships were magnificent, each one unique and beautiful in ways that defied description. They seemed to glow with inner light, their hulls shifting between different colors and patterns like living things. Open a communication channel, she ordered. The screen filled with the image of a human male with kind eyes and a calm expression. This is Commander Pete Johnson of the Earth Defense Fleet. You must be Captain Zarath. We've been expecting you. You know who I am? Zarath asked in surprise. We've been watching and listening for 3 centuries, Commander Johnson replied. We know about your people, your history, your struggles. We know you've been one of the few voices calling for peace in this region of space. Zarath felt tears forming in her eyes. Are you really them? Are you really the humans from the old stories? We are, Pete said simply. And we're sorry we had to stay hidden for so long. Why did you come back now? She asked. Pete's expression grew serious. Because we couldn't watch genocide happen when we had the power to stop it. The Kethran Empire was killing millions of innocent people. We had to act. But your technology, Zarath said. It's so far beyond anything we have. How did you advance so quickly? Pete smiled. Necessity and time. When your entire species faces extinction, you learn to adapt quickly. We spent 3 centuries not just surviving, but growing beyond what we used to be. The screen split to show another human, an elderly woman with white hair and eyes full of wisdom. I am Admiral Susan Torres, commander of the Earth Defense Fleet. Captain Zarath, we would like to invite you aboard our flagship for a formal meeting. An hour later, Zarath found herself walking through corridors that seemed to pulse with life. The walls glowed softly, responding to her presence, and she could hear something that sounded almost like music in the air around her. The ship is alive, she whispered in amazement. In a way, yes, Admiral Torres replied, walking beside her. Our ships are grown, not built. They're part machine, part organism, part consciousness. They think and feel and dream just like we do. They entered a meeting room where dozens of humans were waiting. Zarath was struck by how normal they looked. Not the godlike beings she had expected, but ordinary people with extraordinary capabilities. We have a proposition for your government, Admiral Torres said as they sat down. We want to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Vaxian Confederacy and other peaceful species. What kind of relations? Zarath asked. Mutual defense treaties, technology sharing agreements, cultural exchange programs. We've been alone for 3 centuries, Captain. We're ready to rejoin the galactic community. Dr. Martinez stepped forward with a small device. This contains the complete history of what happened to humanity, including proof of who we are and where we've been. Take it back to your leaders. Zarath accepted the device with shaking hands. What about the Kethrans? What will you do with them? We're going to try something that's never been done before, Admiral Torres replied. We're going to try to change them. Change them how? Pete Johnson leaned forward. The Kethran Empire exists because their society teaches them that conquest is the only way to survive. We're going to show them a different path. You think you can convince an entire species to abandon war? Zarath asked in disbelief. We convinced ourselves, Dr. Martinez said quietly. 3 centuries ago, humans were just as violent and aggressive as the Kethrans. We fought wars, conquered territories, killed each other over resources and beliefs. But the plague taught us that our greatest enemy wasn't other species, it was our own nature. So what did you do? We chose to become something better, Admiral Torres replied. We learned that true strength isn't the ability to destroy your enemies, but the wisdom to turn them into friends. Zarath looked around the room at the faces of the humans surrounding her. They had the power to conquer the entire galaxy, but instead they were offering friendship and cooperation. It was the most hopeful thing she had heard in decades. My people will want to know, she said, what you expect from us in return for your help. Pete smiled. Nothing that you wouldn't freely give. We want to be part of the galactic community. Again, but as partners, not rulers. We've learned that the best way to protect ourselves is to help others protect themselves. And if some species refuse your friendship? Admiral Torres's expression grew serious. Then we'll respect their choice, as long as they don't threaten innocent people. But if they do, she gestured toward the viewport, where the disabled Kethran fleet was still visible in the distance. Well, you've seen what happens to those who choose violence over peace. As Zarath prepared to return to her ship with the proof that would change the galaxy forever, she realized that the age of endless war might finally be coming to an end. The humans had returned, not as conquerors, but as guardians. The legends had been true all along. 6 months had passed since the humans revealed themselves to the galaxy, and everything had changed. The Great Assembly Hall on Kepler Station had been expanded to hold representatives from over 300 different species, all gathered, to witness the signing of the new Galactic Peace Accord. Admiral Samantha Ross stood at the central podium, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, others completely alien to human eyes. She wore the simple blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, with no weapons or symbols of military power. The message was clear. Humanity came in peace. Friends, she began, her voice carried by translation devices to every corner of the vast hall. 6 months ago, most of you thought humans were legends. Today, we stand together as partners in building a better future for all our peoples. In the front row sat former Supreme War Leader Krathzone, no longer wearing the battle armor of a Kethran commander, but the simple robes of a peace negotiator. The transformation of the Kethran Empire had been the most surprising development of the past months. Instead of being destroyed or imprisoned, the former warriors had been invited to Earth to learn about human history and philosophy. When I first met humans, Krathzone said when called to speak, I expected conquerors who would enslave my people. Instead, I found teachers who showed us that strength without wisdom is just another form of weakness. The audience listened in amazement as the former war leader described his time on Earth. He had walked through human cities where different species lived and worked together. He had seen Kethran children playing with human children in schools built for both species. Most importantly, he had learned that the human's greatest victory wasn't defeating his fleet. It was turning his people from enemies into friends. Captain Zarath, now serving as the official liaison between the Vaxian Confederacy and Earth, smiled as she watched the ceremony. Her ship had been one of the first to establish regular trade routes with human colonies, carrying not just goods but ideas and knowledge between species that had been strangers for centuries. The humans have given us something more valuable than their advanced technology, she had told her government in her official report. They've given us hope that the galaxy can be better than it was. On Earth, in the same mountain facility where the decision to reveal humanity had been made, President Helen Foster met with her advisors to discuss the future. The room's walls now displayed star maps showing the locations of new human colonies being established throughout the galaxy, each one designed to serve as a center for cooperation and learning. The Zelani Collective has requested human assistance with their terraforming projects, reported Secretary Manning. They want to learn our bio-integration techniques. Approved, President Foster replied. What about the Traders Guild? They're asking for help upgrading their ships with human consciousness interface technology. They say it will make interstellar commerce safer and more efficient. General Davis looked up from his reports. The former Kethran territories are requesting permanent human peacekeeping forces. They want to make sure the old ways of conquest never return. President Foster nodded thoughtfully. This was exactly what humanity had hoped would happen. Instead of ruling through fear or force, they were being invited to help other species solve their own problems. What's the status of the new academy? She asked. Construction is ahead of schedule, General Davis replied. The Galactic Peace Academy on Luna will be ready to accept its first class of students next year. We've already received applications from over 50 species. The Academy was humanity's most ambitious project, a school where young beings from across the galaxy would learn together, studying everything from advanced science to conflict resolution. The goal was to create a new generation of leaders who understood that cooperation was stronger than competition. On a small farming world called New Eden, Amy Patterson walked through fields where humans and aliens worked side by side to grow food for the expanding galactic community. She had left her job as a crisis coordinator to become something she had never expected, a teacher. Miss Amy, called a young Vaxian student, running up to her with excitement. Look what I grew. The child held up a plant that was half Earth tomato and half Vaxian grain, a hybrid that could grow on worlds where neither original species could survive alone. It was a perfect symbol of what the galaxy was becoming. Different species working together to create something better than either could achieve alone. That's wonderful, Kayla, Amy said, kneeling down to examine the plant. Your parents will be very proud. Around them, the settlement buzzed with activity as humans and aliens built homes, schools, and workshops together. Children who had never heard of war played games that required cooperation instead of competition. Adults shared knowledge and techniques that had been kept secret for generations. In orbit above the planet, Admiral Jake Morrison commanded the IOWI, newest addition to the Earth Defense Fleet, not a warship but a massive mobile hospital and research station called the EDS Harmony. His crew included doctors, scientists, and engineers from dozens of different species, all working together to heal the wounds left by centuries of conflict. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we're receiving a distress call from the Rigel system. A natural disaster has struck one of the colonies. Set course immediately, Jake ordered. Signal all available ships in the sector to assist. Within hours, vessels from 6 different species were converging on Rigel, carrying supplies, medical equipment, and rescue personnel. It was exactly the kind of cooperation that would have been impossible just months earlier. Back on Kepler Station, the signing ceremony was reaching its conclusion. The Galactic Peace Accord wasn't just a treaty. It was a promise that the species of the galaxy would work together to solve problems instead of fighting over resources. Today marks the beginning of a new age, Admiral Samantha Ross announced, as the last signatures were added to the document. An age where our children will grow up knowing cooperation instead of conquest, where our differences make us stronger instead of dividing us. Supreme War Leader Krathzone, now calling himself simply Krathzone the Peaceful, stood to address the assembly one final time. The humans taught my people that true victory doesn't come from defeating your enemies. It comes from helping them become your friends. The hall erupted in applause as representatives from hundreds of worlds stood together, united in their commitment to a better future. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was at peace. On Earth, in a small apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Dr. Carol Martinez sat with her granddaughter, reading from an old book of stories. The little girl looked up with curious eyes and asked, "Grandma, what were the old days like before the peace?" Carol smiled and closed the book. "They were darker times, sweetheart. People fought wars and hurt each other because they were afraid. But then we learned something important." What did we learn? We learned that the best way to stop being afraid of someone is to become their friend. Outside the window, ships from Dozens of different worlds moved through Earth's skies, carrying students, diplomats, and traders who would have been enemies just a year before. Children played in parks where human and alien families shared picnics and laughter. The age of legends had ended. The age of friendship had begun. As night fell over the Earth, the stars seemed brighter than they had in centuries. Each point of light represented not a distant and dangerous unknown, but a potential friend waiting to be discovered. Humanity had returned to the galaxy not as conquerors, but as teachers, healers, and protectors. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and for the first time in history, all its peoples were free to explore it together. In the end, the greatest human achievement wasn't their advanced technology or their powerful ships. It was proving that even the most bitter enemies could learn to trust each other, and that cooperation was always stronger than conflict. The legends had been true, but the reality was even better than the stories.